Hmm. Hmm. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. Hello, I'm American Johnson, and yes, this is yet another damn video about Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime. Look, if you're sick of the discourse surrounding Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, I get it. I'm sick of it too, but I am a professional YouTuber after all. I've gotta do shit like this just to keep the lights on. I gotta dress up like a fucking clown and paint my tongue with the fucking clown makeup just like the guy in the movie, and I gotta drop some spicy ass takes about the movie that I didn't even really feel like watching, all in worship of some dark algorithmic gods, and I am currently well out of the good graces of the algorithm, by the way, so could you just cut me some slack? Would you cut me some fucking slack? And hey, before we really jump into things, can we just take a little moment and talk about leftist pop culture analysis culture for a hot second? I mean, I just want to point out that even though I'm a super serious political type of YouTuber, that does not mean that I take my own opinions about this kind of shit super seriously, and you shouldn't either, but I know you're going to anyway. I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm still getting shade thrown at me for saying I don't really like the Matrix movies that much over a year and a fucking half ago. There's a good chance that you will disagree with a lot of the shit I'm about to say, and that's like 100% okay. To me, the purpose of critiquing art is just to have discussions and try to tease out deeper meaning and truth and find out how works of art reflect and intersect with our reality and, you know, pretentious shit like that. So if you're thinking about getting pissed off about my interpretation of Joker starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, then maybe just like pump the GD brakes and consider the fact that maybe it's not such a big deal if we see things differently about a fucking movie about a clown. Holy crap, what am I doing? I'm sitting here dressed like a clown yelling at strangers about movies on the internet. YouTube discourse is poison. What were we even talking about? Oh yes, Joker starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime is a film about Arthur Fleck, a creepy white guy who fails at being a comedian, lives in a big city, and dresses like a clown and struggles with mental illness. Hey, look how much I have in common with the fucking creepy clown guy. I'm a white guy, I'm a failed comedian, I live in a big city, I'm currently, as we've discussed, dressed as a clown, and I have struggled all my life with mental illness, believe it or not. I guess you can call me the clown prince of a communism. All of that is 100% true, by the way, including the bit about mental illness. Throughout my life, I've suffered from anxiety, depression, panic attacks, ADHD, and a handful of other little psychological quirks and ailments along the way. Now these days, I'm in much better mental health thanks to years of therapy and self-help and a few rounds of medication. Meditation and exercise helps a lot, you know, that sort of thing. But just a few years ago, there were periods where I would lay in bed for weeks on end, unable to muster the will to just get out of bed because of my depression. I've lost jobs and relationships because of my mental health problems, and when things were at their very worst, I was in a very vulnerable position and faced a good bit of discrimination because my brain was not 100% healthy and normal. So those are just some of the reasons why I have always been interested in how mental illness is portrayed in the media and in the public at large, because it affects people like me. Now, I'm especially concerned when I see journalism and works of literature and film that reinforce false negative stereotypes about mental illness, you know, like Joker starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, which, if you can't tell by now, I wasn't too crazy about. Because there's a chance it might be spurring people into committing acts of violence. You liberal snowflake, you've already typed into the comment section by now. Do you really think that a movie is going to make people violent? It's just a movie. Movies don't make people violent. You can't stop crazy people from becoming mass shooters. Well, relax, pal, because I am not a liberal snowflake. I'm a communist snowflake, and I'm not here to talk about how this movie is bad because it's depicting a guy dressed like the Joker pulling off a theater shooting, though that was a little fucked up, wasn't it? I mean, wasn't that a little fucked up? But that's really not what I'm here to talk about. I'm not really that concerned about angry white dudes seeing Joker starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime being inspired to go on shooting sprees. Because truth be told, angry white dudes don't really seem to need much external influence to go on shooting sprees, am I right? Whew, Tough crowd. Anyway, the potential for inspiring copycat killings isn't really something I'm particularly worried about here. So if you want to see something like that, then turn on MSNBC or CNN or talk to your uncle who has the Hillary 2016 sticker still on the bumper of their Subaru or something like that. It was a low blow. I'm sorry, Subaru owners. But to put it simply, I'm not concerned that this film will inspire the mentally ill to commit violence on the public at large. I am much more concerned that it might influence the public at large to commit violence on the mentally ill, because there is currently a decided cultural drift towards eugenics against the mentally ill, which this film might just be contributing to. Eugenics? How did we get from a silly killer clown movie to eugenics, you scream? It was just an artsy-fartsy supervillain movie. Why do you gotta make it political? Why so serious? Anyway, before we go too far down this road, let's talk about some other leftist takes I've seen floating around the interwebs about Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime. Now, a lot of my fine fellow leftists are saying that Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, is a film about class warfare. And for sure, the film certainly features class antagonism up to and including riotous working class mobs storming bourgeois theaters with signs that say, "Kill the rich," which is cool and all, but all that stuff is just window dressing, in my opinion. See, the way I see it, themes can be broadly separated into two categories. There are developed themes which drive the characters and the narrative forward and give deeper insight into human nature and reality. And then there are superficial themes which serve more of an aesthetic role and never really get unpacked by the story. And I would argue that in Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, class conflict is merely a superficial theme because the film never deeply explores the nature of class antagonism, nor does class conflict ever seriously drive the narrative nor the characters forward in any way. Now, this may seem odd since the very first piece of information the film gives you is related to class conflict. It opens with snippets of news reports about a sanitation strike, which is leading to trash piling up throughout the city, but spoiler warning, the strike never really has any material impact on the story at any point whatsoever. Now, the antagonist, the antagonist, Arthur, portrayed by Joaquin Phoenix in the role of a lifetime, never really has any sort of meaningful engagement with class conflict. Sure, city budget cuts eliminate the social services department that supplies Arthur with therapy and medication, but Arthur didn't really seem to be benefiting from those services to begin with, and he doesn't really seem very upset when he loses them. We'll get more into that in just a bit, so hold your dang horses, reply, guys. But anyway, the wealthy capitalist class, is certainly portrayed as a bunch of greedy, arrogant pricks, as they are in Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, but they don't really come off much worse than the working class, which is portrayed as an animalistic hive mind of violent assholes. Seriously, this film is pretty antagonistic against wealthy and working class people. It paints a picture of a typical prole as a bloodthirsty brute who's just one Boilermaker away from burning the city down at any moment. So Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, might not be particularly kind to the rich, but it's by no means a love letter to the working class. It basically just seems to adopt the nihilistic perspective that everyone, yes, that includes you, is an asshole. Yes, Arthur and his mother Penny, played by the mom from 6 Feet Under, are hard up for money, but they don't really seem too stressed about it. There's no landlord character and pounding on the door and hounding them for money. There's no scene where Arthur is going through a stack of bills and trying to figure out how they're gonna get all these bills paid. His neighbor does complain about how shitty the building is, but Arthur and his mom really don't seem to care very much about that. They actually seem pretty content. I mean, yes, Arthur gets mugged in the first scene, but it's by a bunch of street kids, his fellow poors, and he never even seems to give any kind of a shit about his wallet being stolen. Now, yes, Arthur loses his job, but again, this has absolutely nothing to do with class conflict. He loses the job because he was throwing a fucking gun around in a children's hospital, which, is kind of a no-no, even from the perspective of the exploited working class. If anything, his boss is slightly more sympathetic than most of the other characters in the film, rich or poor. Yes, Arthur is rejected by millionaire bat dad Thomas Wayne. Arthur is coldly turned away from the mansion gates and sucker punched in the men's room by the man he believed to be his father, but this had nothing to do with class conflict. It was just because he legitimately wasn't Wayne's son. And yeah, Wayne was an asshole, but it didn't have anything to do with his wealth per se. I mean, what's his name? The butler guy? Archibald? Archibald was an asshole too. They're all just assholes. Everyone's just an asshole in this movie. Everybody. And speaking of assholes, yes, Arthur's first victims are rich Wall Street guys, but that's purely a coincidence. I mean, these are rich guys, they're Wall Street guys, but they're riding the subway, they're drunk, they're harassing a woman. It doesn't really have much to do with their class at all. And Arthur's first shots are, fired because they start beating him up. It's in self-defense. But these guys' actions are not tied to their wealth in any way. They just happen to be rich, but you wouldn't even have known that they were wealthy Wall Street guys if the movie didn't spoon feed that information to you a couple of scenes later with the newspaper headline. I just thought they were proletarian themselves. I mean, I guess we were supposed to pick up on the fact that they were wealthy because they were wearing ties? I don't know, it doesn't matter. The point is, it doesn't really matter that they were rich. They could have been poor. It would have plugged right into the story just as easily if they were poor. Arthur didn't kill them because they were rich. He killed them because they were beating his ass. And as we all know, rich people don't do that. They get the cops to do that for them. Now, if there's one strong driving theme in the movie that is often tied to class conflict, it is alienation. And the people of Gotham are all alienated from each other, and alienation is typically a strong component of Marxist philosophy, but the alienation we see in Joker starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in The Role of a Lifetime does not seem to have any clear ties to class conflict. Like, the Marxist concept of alienation is a specific thing. It is specifically rooted in working class people lacking ownership of their own labor. I talk about it pretty extensively in my Why Capitalism Sucks series, so I'll just throw a link to that in the description and summarize by saying this movie's version of alienation is not a class-based conception of alienation, like, at all. It's a more universal, generalized, again, nihilistic form of alienation. Everyone hates everyone else because everyone's an asshole. That's the read I got, anyway. So the point I'm trying to make is that Arthur is alienated, but not because of class conflict, and he does struggle, but not because of his class, and class conflict is there, but it's more of a superficial, undeveloped, static, aesthetic theme of the film with no more impact on the story than any other aesthetic features, like the gritty linoleum tiles all over the place or the drab 70s inspired art direction. The class conflict is there to look cool. It doesn't serve any narrative purpose. It doesn't give us any deeper understanding of class division. People are cruel to Arthur, very cruel, but it has nothing to do with class conflict. A bunch of poor kids are cruel to Arthur. A bunch of Wall Street guys are cruel to Arthur. Arthur's working class coworkers are cruel to Arthur. A millionaire is cruel to Arthur. A millionaire's butler is cruel to Arthur. The cruelty drives the story forward, but the cruelty is completely disconnected from class conflict.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
You want to know why the world is really messed up? Have you ever wondered how the world became such a nightmarish hellhole? Hi, my name is Ray Ramses, and I'm a brown socialist YouTuber from the Global South. I try to answer these questions on my channel, along with many other fun subjects you've probably wondered about. I do deep dives on stuff like climate change, imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, fascism, and more. So if gazing into the unending, bleak, and dreadful abyss that is our currently capitalist hellscape is your jam, go check out and subscribe to my channel.
So what does drive the movie? What drives Arthur over the edge and sends him on his journey of violent self-discovery? Well, the answer, of course, is mental illness. Well, not real mental illness, but, Hollywood fantasy mental illness. The kind that's built on foundations of stereotypes, urban legend, and misconception. In Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in The Role of a Lifetime, mental illness is portrayed cartoonishly without any grounding in reality whatsoever. Arthur's mental illness is written ineptly, and it's clear that no shits were given about a true life portrayal of the symptoms and circumstances of mental health conditions that exist here in our real world. Now, there's this great old movie called Throw Mama from the Train about a writing professor portrayed by
Billy Crystal.
And one of the students in this fiction writing class is a lady who decides to write a submarine novel, even though she has no clue how submarines operate, and she makes no effort to do any research on the subject whatsoever. Let's take a look.
Dive! Dive! Yelled the captain through the thing. So the man who makes it dive pressed a button or something, and it dove. And the enemy was foiled again. Looks like we foiled them again, said Dave. Yeah, said the captain. We foiled those bastards again, didn't we, Dave? Yeah, said Dave. The end.
Okay.
That's the distinct feeling that I got as someone who has suffered mental illness myself and studied psychology and mental health a good bit, and who spent some time engaged in mental health activism. I mean, I'm no expert myself, but I know that Arthur's mental illness is completely fabricated. It is a work of fantasy. Now, there is a tendency in YouTube videos to go all or nothing with this kind of analysis, and I want to take a moment here to say that there were a few flashes of poignance when it comes to mental illness in Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime. I was particularly touched by this line. Worst part about having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't. Now, as someone who has suffered from mental illness, I found those words to be quite powerful. It is indeed very painful to be suffering from depression and to have your loved ones say shit like, well, can't you just cheer up? Just be happy. It sucks feeling like you're a burden or an inconvenience to everyone around you because you suffer from mental illness. It is downright exhausting having to hide mental illness from your boss or your coworkers for fear of losing your job. So I really did like that line. It resonated with me. Unfortunately, the movie didn't really deliver on the thematic issues behind that line much at all. I mean, the worst things that happened to Arthur did not happen because people were reacting to his mental illness. I think the one lady was kind of mean to him on the bus. People got a little uncomfortable when he laughed, but the real shit that really hurt him had no relation to his mental illness. He was not mugged because he was mentally ill. He wasn't fired because he was mentally ill. He was fired because he brought a fucking gun into a children's hospital. He wasn't rejected by Thomas Wayne because he was mentally ill. He just wasn't Thomas Wayne's son. The vast majority of Arthur's suffering was more or less random or self-inflicted. Okay, so what about the socio-political environment Arthur faces as an individual with mental illness? He is certainly underserved when it comes to mental health care, and this does have clear parallels with our reality. As we all very much know, mental health care is tragically out of reach for most of us. Arthur receives low-quality treatment through social services at the beginning of the film, and this treatment is cut off early in the movie, but that doesn't really seem to matter to Arthur. He makes one throwaway line about how he's off his medication right before he kills that one guy, his coworker guy, but otherwise it really doesn't seem like it matters that much. The treatment seems incidental when he's receiving it, and losing access to it seems to only minimally affect his situation. It's a superficial theme that doesn't really develop our understanding of what it's like to lack access to mental health care, nor does it significantly drive the story forward. Now, a more dynamic, driving theme of the film seems to be the concept that mental illness leads to violence, and the popular narrative further implies that mental health care is important because, get this, it prevents violence, since mentally ill people are, according to this narrative, inherently violent. This theme is starkly embedded in the climactic line of the film, "What do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash? You get what you fucking deserve." In other words, the film indicates that societies that don't provide robust mental health care services will suffer violence from the mentally ill, and the film also seems to seek to establish that when people go on shooting sprees, it's some kind of poetic justice for not properly providing mental health care, which would have prevented the violence according to the movie. Now, this is an exceptionally flawed perspective because in reality, violence is not a mental health problem. And the vast majority of people with mental illness are not violent, and most murders are, by and large, not caused by people's mental illness. So why does this matter? Well, because the mentally ill are already in a very vulnerable position in our society, in particular because of this very false stereotype that the mentally ill are categorically prone to violence. Right now, Donald Trump and other lawmakers are seeking to lock up mentally ill people as the solution to violence. Trump wants to build more mental health care facilities so he can lock up more mentally ill people because, in his words, we don't have enough of those institutions anymore and people can't get proper care. Whatever that means. I mean, I think it means locking people up.
We must reform our mental health laws to better identify mentally disturbed individuals who may commit acts of violence and make sure those people not only get treatment, but when necessary, involuntary confinement. Mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun.
Now, never mind that mentally ill people are already more likely to go to prison for nonviolent offenses than people who are not mentally ill. And never mind that, again, most violent mass murders are not caused by mental illness. Trump shares the same perspective as the film. Both the film and Donald Trump are propagating the myth that mentally ill people are intrinsically violent, and that locking up mentally ill people is the solution to violence. And this is a eugenicist position. It is not grounded in reality, and it puts the mentally ill at great risk in our society. Blaming a marginalized group of people for social ills is nothing new, and it has been a component of cinema since its inception. Of course, the Nazis made films that implied Jewish people are prone to violent malevolence, and before you invoke Godwin's law, now, I'm not gonna go so far as to say that Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, has nearly so much intentionality as a Third Reich propaganda film, but when it comes to political impact of art, intentions are not nearly as important to me as material outcomes. A better comparison to this situation might be Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
Why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
There are a lot of parallels here, actually. Psycho was a wonderfully shot and art-directed film featuring an incredible lead performance by a character who is prone to violence because of mental illness, just like Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime. If anything, Psycho is even more overt than Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, in tying the violence in the film to mental illness. Most people forget that the ending of Psycho includes a 5-minute-long, boring, pseudo-scientific lecture about how mental illness led Norman Bates to violence.
I got the whole story, but not from Norman. I got it from his mother. Norman Bates no longer exists. He only half existed to begin with.
Now, that's what I meant when I said I got the story from the mother. You see, when the mind houses two personalities, there's always a conflict, a battle. In Norman's case, the battle is over, and the dominant personality has won. And the $40,000? Who got that? The swamp. These were crimes of passion, not profit.
Movies like Psycho have gone a long way in coloring the public perception of the mentally ill. And I think it's pretty safe to say that these perceptions are harmful to the mentally ill. A 2013 scientific literature review found that the stigma against mentally ill people in the USA is very widespread, and that social stigmas lead to material harm for the mentally ill. But in truth, the links between violence and mental illness are dubious at best. The unfortunate fact is that there's much more of a correlation between the white dudeness of Norman Bates and Arthur and violence than there is between mental illness and violence. And that could have been much more interesting for the film to address, but it really never even broached the subject of the kinds of frustrations that can stem from being a white male in capitalist society, the kinds of frustrations that really do lead to violent shooting sprees and acts of mass murder, which I see as a huge missed opportunity to explore a problem that really is plaguing our society. Hollywood, unfortunately, has a lot of power when it comes to shaping the popular narrative. So when a film comes out that handles mental illness in such a clumsy, unrealistic, and stigmatizing way, it becomes necessary for advocates and political activists who are concerned with the well-being of the mentally ill and who suffer from mental illness themselves to push back against that narrative to try to prevent harmful, popular, false perceptions and stereotypes from arising or from being embedded even more deeply in the fabric of our society. Now, for anyone who has experienced mental illness or been around mentally ill people or been through psychological therapy or had to go on or off psychological medication, this film just rings completely and absurdly false. Arthur doesn't act mentally ill. He acts movie crazy. He acts like you would expect a mentally ill person to act in a movie. His mental illness is a prop, it's a costume. It's a set of aesthetic choices and cliches that serve to reinforce the preconceptions and prejudices of the audience rather than challenge them with a sympathetic portrait of reality. Movie craziness is meant to otherize and alienate characters so that the audience can comfortably demonize and vilify them, or at least enjoy the spectacle of it all, because generally we're conditioned to believe that it's okay to vilify and sensationalize mental illness. But the reality of mental illness is that it's not that spectacular. In the vast majority of cases, mental illness is not fun or frightening or fantastic or anything like what we see in Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime. It's just painful and or sad and or annoying. There are some films and TV shows that do deal with mental illness in a more realistic and compelling manner. For instance, I really like the way that Chuck McGill in Better Call Saul is portrayed. I think he's portrayed with sympathy and with understanding. Chuck's suffering is not sensationalized or overplayed, and it doesn't define the most important aspects of his character. He's much more of a living, breathing character who is more than his mental illness, and his suffering is eloquently expressed with depth and subtlety both by Chuck and by the characters around him. Another example is 6 Feet Under, which features several characters who struggle with various forms of mental illness in ways that are compassionate and at least a little bit more realistic and also tragically banal. I mean, just look at the way Frances Conroy portrays dealing with a mentally ill partner in 6 Feet Under.
Do you know what they call an Italian hooker? A prostitute.
That kind of humor doesn't really appeal to me, George.
Guess it's not that funny.
You're goddamn right it's not funny! None of this is funny! You tricked me into marrying you! You knew you were crazy and didn't tell me, and now I have to take care of you for the rest of my life! What did I do to fucking deserve this?
You can really taste the rosemary.
Versus how she portrays mental illness herself in Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime as Penny, Arthur's mom.
He's an extraordinary man, happy, a very powerful man. We were in love. He said it was best that we not be together because of appearances. And I couldn't tell anyone because, well, I signed some papers. And besides, you can imagine what people would say about Thomas and me, what they'd say about you.
Now I'd argue that 6 Feet Under outbreak, traumatic as it was also much more subtle in an important way. It comes much closer to the truth of what it's like for people to deal with having a loved one who is mentally ill. It comes much closer to the truth of that line. The worst part about having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't. Now, more than anything, I feel like Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime, it just missed a lot of opportunities. It dealt with a lot of themes that really do need to be dealt with in our current society, but it dealt with them kind of poorly. Now, we do need to be concerned with class conflict and wealth inequality, but not from that nihilistic, anti-working class perspective that the film has. We should ask why white men are so often compelled to go on violent shooting sprees and commit acts of political terrorism in this day and age. But we need to drop that false narrative that this violence is caused by mental illness, since it almost always has nothing to do with mental illness, and the mentally ill are not by and large driven to perpetuate mass violence. And we absolutely do need to fight for much wider access to mental health care, but not out of fear that the mentally ill will become violent. That just hurts mentally ill people more. We should all want better access to mental health care for everyone, for the simple fact that any one of us might become mentally ill at any point in our lives. And in addition to access to mental health care, we need to also work to remove the stigma that surrounds being mentally ill. A stigma that has been exacerbated by inaccurate Hollywood depictions of mental illness for over a century. The false narrative that the mentally ill are violent has led to untold suffering throughout human history, from the torturous insane asylums of the 18th and 19th centuries to the earliest victims of the Nazi Holocaust being mentally ill people who were labeled as life unfit for living, to the current threats facing mentally ill people today, with Donald Trump threatening to lock them up in prison. Whether this film intends to or not, it does, at least in some small way, reinforce a perspective of mental illness which has been used by eugenicists throughout modern history to murder and suppress the mentally ill. And why am I talking about this? Am I trying to ruin a fun comic book movie or cancel the filmmakers? No, I really don't care if you enjoyed watching Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime. To tell the truth, I enjoyed watching it myself. I really thought it was an enjoyable movie, but whether we like it or not, all art is political, and popular art can have social and political consequences. So when a film like this comes along, it kind of forces us as a society to talk about these things, just to try to push back against this false narrative that's most likely being unintentionally presented. Now, was this film irresponsible? And that's not for me to decide. You can decide that if you'd like, but for my part, I think these attitudes and perceptions of the mentally ill are so omnipresent in our society that they're almost unavoidable for most folks, at least until enough members of society learn the truth about what mental illness really is and what it means for those of us who suffer from it and how these perceptions do us harm. In that sense, I think sharing the truth about social problems that are misrepresented in art and media is important, necessary work, even if it's not the most fun work to do sometimes. It builds towards a sort of herd immunity against baseless stereotypes and harmful misconceptions and stigmas. If enough of us learn to understand the real nature of mental illness, then films like this will lose their destructive power. I mean, you know about Reefer Madness, that old quote-unquote documentary about marijuana that tried to convince the viewer that pot smoking leads to violence and complete insanity? And today we can look back at that film, we can laugh about it. We can laugh and laugh about Reefer Madness, and I often do, but that doesn't mean it wasn't harmful when it first came out for contributing to a false narrative about drug use, and some of those effects still are with us today. So yeah, I'm not here to tell you that you can't enjoy Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joker in the role of a lifetime. Watch it, enjoy it, talk about it with your friends, but when it does come up in conversation, I don't know, maybe use it as an opportunity to talk about the reality of mental health and the stigmatization of the mentally ill, and also use it as an excuse to talk about communism, because communism's pretty cool. The end. There's more of this clown paint. It's got a good taste to it. Bye, y'all.
Now, a circus clown likes to have a full half hour for putting on his face. It may include a big rubber nose, but he can do it all in 10 minutes if he's in a big hurry. And we are in a hurry, fellas, because the big top is filling up with people. So in they go. Here are the Iron Jaw roller skaters. He holds her with his teeth alone. And here's another kind of iron jaw stunt that takes place in the big top high over our heads. We're proud to have acrobats like these in our circus. A difficult forward somersault. Watch for them. Look out. Here they come. Now our big show is over. And late tonight, we will load up, hurry away, keep a date in another town tomorrow morning.